Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all. Whether you are watching this stream on YouTube or on Rumble, it's a big day in the United States. Everybody is anticipating what is going to happen, and not only the Americans, the rest of the world is watching with worried eyes and minds and hearts these elections. Every 4 years, they say this election is the most important election in our lifetime. So you have to go and vote for this candidate or that candidate. And just for a disclaimer for YouTube and for all the mind readers and for the misinformation and disinformation and hate speech policies on YouTube and other platforms, on Syriana Analysis, to be honest with you, I don't care who is going to be the president of the United States, and I'm not going to support or any of the candidates, because I personally at least learned my lessons from these elections. But there are so many other people are very enthusiastic, so we're going to be very critical about the elections and these candidates. And I'm having with me Patrick Henningsen. He's a brilliant journalist and the founder of the 21st Century. His X account in the description below. When he used to publish investigations on his 21st Century about Syria, those were brilliant articles, and I was still starting. It was the beginning of my, let's say, English speaking career. So he has done amazing job also on Syria. Thank you so much, Patrick, for coming to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. Such an important day in U.S. Politics, supposedly anyway. That's what we're told. But yeah, there's a lot going on.
Indeed. Actually, I wanted to check what Trump and Kamala Harris said just before we start this live streaming together. And Trump just posted this on his X account. He says, "It is now officially election day. This will be the most important day in American history. Voter enthusiasm is through the roof because people want to make America great again. That means lines are going to be long. I need you to deliver your vote no matter how long it takes. Stay in line. The radical communist Democrats want you to pack up and go home. Together we are going to have a tremendous victory and make America great again." Kamala Harris didn't post anything enthusiastic or exciting or philosophical on her page. She just said, "When we fight, we win." And that's that, as Jordan Peterson says. I think many people, firstly, in the US, when they want to choose and pick who are they going to vote, probably they are taking into consideration the domestic policies, right, Patrick? For them, what matters the most? I mean, if you're an American, what attracts you domestically speaking to vote for Kamala or for Trump to begin with?
Well, I mean, in the past elections, in 2020, it would have been issues like the social justice, woke or anti-woke, depending on what side of the issue you're on there. That was definitely a big one. And of course, like who was pro-lockdown, who was against lockdown. Those were some big issues that were kind of on the ballot in 2020. Discounting, of course, any conversations about election rigging and fraud. We can talk about that. But this election is a little bit different. Trump is not the incumbent. So the economy is going to factor in massively as well domestically. But the other one is the fact that the Democratic administration has gone after Donald Trump and his supporters through the Department of Justice, the FBI, using the organs of government and law enforcement to knock out the competition. Literally, they tried to get him off the ballot. They tried to get him in jail. They stacked up all these federal and civil cases during the election that started right before the primary. So there was an intention to keep Donald Trump, basically out of the race. And when it found out he was staying in the race and doing well, and Joe Biden was sliding, I think there was an effort at the Democratic elite level to basically decommission Joe Biden, send him out to pasture, and then replace him with, we got Kamala Harris, who is the vice president, who is hugely unpopular, even within her own party. not inspirational at all, even to Democrats. But they rank and file will stand there, bite their tongue in some cases, or enthusiastically go out and vote for her because it's so partisan and things are so polarized in America politically that this is just the way it's going to be. A lot of Democrats are still selling this as an existential crisis. They can't let Hitler into power, and this will be the end of democracy, and fascism will be ushered in with Trump. And so that's a very strong belief by a lot of Democrats. So on the Republican Trump MAGA side, it's we need to preserve the integrity of the constitutional republic, lower inflation, and somehow make America great again. On the Democratic side, it's we need to protect the country and our children from Orange Hitler. And these horrible behavior of Donald Trump that will cast such a dark shadow over the country that America will never be able to recover, and there won't be any more elections because Donald Trump. Both parties are saying there won't be any elections after this. Both parties, and that's kind of interesting that that's being said on both sides. I personally don't believe that's gonna be possible, but some tinkering can be done certainly. With regards to gerrymandering states for the Electoral College, or packing the Supreme Court with 21 justices. The types of things you see in Brazil and other countries where you have these pre-collapse moments. The Democrats have wanted to get rid of the filibuster, wanted to pack the courts, wanted to put Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states with votes in the Senate, which would effectively mean there will never be a Republican president, or again, just by the mathematics of the Electoral College, and turn Texas into a Democrat state by opening the southern border. That these aren't conspiracy theories anymore. These are actively being talked about. So I can see how both sides see this as an existential election.
Patrick, one of the commentators is asking you, is Patrick still with the no to NATO, no to war movement? This is a personal question to you. Some of the commentators asking you.
I spoke on some of their rallies and hosted some of their live streams, and I still support no to NATO. I haven't been on there in a while, so but I back the sentiment of what they're campaigning for. I think NATO is a huge threat to peace in Europe and in the world and in the Middle East and everywhere. So I think NATO's should have been decommissioned along with the Iron Curtain back in 1990. So, but instead the opposite happened.
Yeah, that's such a Kremlin talking point, Patrick, to say that.
That's what they say. You're not allowed to have your own independent ideas anymore.
No.
You never came to those conclusions yourself, Kevork. It was because Putin has got a Neuralink in the back of your head, and he's making sure those thoughts are being implanted.
Indeed. Actually, one of the things that sometimes I feel like there is a Neuralink chip in somebody's brains when Americans fight about wokeism and anti-wokeism, and you feel like this is something special in the US. I mean, it also exists in Germany and in London, but this scene is so exaggerated in the US into extent that you feel people have adopted an identity to be a woke or an anti-woke. How much do you see this discussion can shape the discourse of these elections? Because the Trump people are vehemently against the wokeism, and the Kamala side, it seems some of the woke, especially those who are supporting now the Palestine movement, they are unsure about Kamala Harris, as if there is some cracks now in Kamala Harris's ranks.
It's very good that you identified this, because Ron DeSantis, to me, was the bellwether for the woke issue on the right, because he based his whole presidential run on being anti-woke. But what he didn't realize is a lot of Americans felt that battle has already been fought and won. Woke is receding. They're on the retreat. It's young kids are now making jokes. Kids are 13, 14 and making jokes about being too woke. So when that happens, you know that basically, watch TikTok, you know that it's dead. So but there's still conservatives that they never got up and campaigned for anything in their life until they became an anti-woke warrior, or before COVID, and they became like an anti-lockdown person. These are people who weren't politically active. And then a lot of them moved to support Israel. And you'll find that with a lot of conservatives and the Great Barrington Declaration crowd. They jumped to back Israel on October 7th because they felt that this was a conservative woke versus anti-woke issue, just because a lot of pro-Palestinian supporters happen to be LGBT, happen to have purple hair and whatnot. And what they fail, and what's disingenuous about this argument, is because those of us who are old enough to remember, the Palestinian issue has been on the docket of global social justice issues for the last 60 plus years in terms of like a mainstream presence alongside apartheid South Africa and all these things. So I remember that in my 20s, and I was always adjacent to those issues. So for me, when October 7th happened, to me, it was just another heinous episode in a series of ongoing episodes for the last 80 years. So, but for the new political activists on the right, they thought, oh my God, look at all these woke people. This is a Soros conspiracy theory to, undermine America. And they're talking about like college campuses, and they're there's Hamas. Terrorists are infiltrating, taking over the minds, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Terrorists have got the Neuralink in the back of American students' brains. And so the whole thing has been completely distorted. The net result of this in the 2024 elections is the unthinkable. I never thought I would see the day where the Palestinian issue could actually swing a U.S. general election. And lo and behold, this is exactly what is happening now. And it was unthinkable because the Israeli lobby has such a lock on both parties.
Yes.
But what happened was you have these young people who basically took a step back from party politics and looked at human rights objectively, and looked at this issue as an objective, as a human issue, as a real protest. So they got tired of fighting fake phantom menaces like climate change and wokeism, or fighting for woke ideological issues, and they found a real issue for the generation. That's what's happened with Gaza. And this has peeled off people who are going to sit out this election. They're not going to vote, or they're going to do a protest vote with Jill Stein or Cornel West. And this is going to hurt the Democrats. If they lose 2 or 3% from this protest vote, or the abstentions that are going to happen, then that can cost them a general election. So I never thought I would see the day where that could even happen. And look, it's happening.
And there is something that I also realized, actually two things, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick. A lot of people who vote now for Jill Stein, they were basically Democrat voters, right? Like most of the people who vote for Jill Stein now, they say the people who support the Democrats, they are saying, if you vote for Jill, you're voting for Trump, basically. And something else I realized, because you mentioned these LGBT people among the pro-Palestine movement and more like neoliberals, I also realized the phenomena of what was her name? The environmentalist kiddo.
Greta Thunberg.
Greta Thunberg. Like Greta Thunberg coming to the scene of the pro-Palestine movement is so divisive and polarizing that it gives the impression that this is the cause of the woke people. This is the cause of the hysterical people among the environmentalists, for example. And so she has created this rift in the pro-Palestine movement that the people who are little bit on the right of the left, let's say centrist, just those people who don't identify themselves with anything, or the conservatives, they have become more like, I don't want to be part of a movement which Greta Thunberg exists, as if she's an establishment plant in the movement to keep at least half the people away from this movement, right?
No, what my Scandinavian contacts have told me is that her handlers, the establishment, are horrified. They're horrified by Greta Thunberg's taking up the Palestinian issue. It was the last thing that they ever wanted to see, because she's more enthusiastic and more passionate about that than she is about climate now. Because like people her age, she's found that this is a defining issue for their generation. And and I think this is I love this version of Greta Thunberg all day long. I think she's brilliant. She's authentic. She's finally found an issue that's real, in my opinion. and she's absolutely grabbed it, and she's taking it to Israel, she's taking it to the Israeli government. She's becoming a BDS spokesperson as well, and the boycott movement on Israel is starting to actually get traction now, and it's hurting a lot of corporations globally, and so a lot of people are reconsidering their trade relationship with the state of Israel as a result of this. So, I mean, these are things that took decades to build up before. It took to red pill a generation like this in 12 months. And, you know, it took our generation 20 years to go through that educational process on, especially on Palestine. And these kids have picked it up in 12 months. So I'm really impressed with the youth on this issue. And now their presence is being felt in this election. And I think this is quite an extraordinary phenomenon.
Hey, she's in Georgia now.
Really?
Yeah, she's in Georgia, and she says she's there to defend the Georgian democracy against Like, so that's why I say, like, it's a hit or miss, like these cases. So it's very divisive.
Well, the other thing, like you said before, is that a vote for Jill Stein. I could tell your German accent, Stein.
Stein, yeah.
Americans would just say Stein, but she said Jill, which is the correct pronunciation, Jill Stein. A vote for Jill Stein is a lot of people, like pollsters. There's a thing in polling called the shy Trump effect that was identified in 2016 and 2020. People answering polls will not publicly profess their preference for Donald Trump to a phone call poll or any kind of survey, but they will vote for Trump, and that's called the shy Trump effect in polling. There's also a shy Stein effect, and because people don't want to be, because she got accused of being a Russian agent by Hillary Clinton and her mob, because in 2016 Jill Stein pulled 3% or something crazy away from Democrats. And so she's now going to get accused. I swear, if Trump wins, she is going to get the Russian agent treatment like you couldn't believe. And people who support her are very conscious of that in this divisive political environment. They don't want to be accused of helping Putin or something like that. That's how kind of screwed up people are. And this is the same people that are probably protesting the Georgia election as well. So. But that's a real problem. And Jill Stein, the Libertarian candidate, who I can't even remember their name, which says a lot. But in 2016, Stein and Gary Johnson, I think collectively turned in something like 6%. You know, that's not nothing in a neck and neck electoral college race. So Jill Stein's actually going to be king or queen maker, I think, in this election.
We have some Stein's voters here in the live chat, and they say they have voted for Jill. I saw a video or a statement for Jill recently that she says she cares about Israel and she cares about the survival of Israel. That's why she's criticizing Israel, right? She believes in a two-state solution. Like it has become. For me, at the current moment, if anyone speaks about a two-state solution, it feels like they're trying to save Israel, from its trouble, because Israel is in a big trouble nowadays, that the talk about a two-state solution has become like a stick you give to Israel to save him from falling from the cliff, And I don't believe there is a two-state solution any longer in Palestine. This was a fantasy that they sold to the people for a long time to prepare for Israel, to prepare its army and the settlements and the ideology and everything in the country to finish on the Palestinian cause, right? So if I was an American saying, YouTube, don't take this so seriously, if I was an American, I would have voted for Jill. Yeah. But at the same time, I would have still be a little bit cautious about this, like why there is no candidate in the US who can say one state for everyone living alongside each other. What is so difficult about that?
I always say to the pundits, I say, especially I pick on conservatives and Republicans because that's more of my peer group, I guess, at this stage of my life, and Christians as well. And I'm saying, so you and I point to them and I say, so you are all for the constitutional republic. You love the U.S. Constitution. You think America is the greatest country that God ever created because of the Bill of Rights. Am I wrong? Yes. And the answer is yes. That's why we love America. We love it so much we want to export that democracy to the world, and even at the barrel of a gun in some cases. But we have an exception. We have an exception with Israel. We support an ethno-religious, ultra hyper nationalist, militarized state that's runs an apartheid pogrom, basically, in its backyard. We're okay with that. And we're going to give them all the guns and money that they want to maintain that completely undemocratic, repressive apartheid system. We wouldn't want that to happen in America, but we don't mind if it's happening to the Arabs over in the Middle East. That's okay. That's okay for us. So the hypocrisy in that is kind of just incredible on its face, but that's because of that disconnect that Americans don't have. That if the standard should be, if it's not good enough for us at home, it shouldn't be allowed. We shouldn't support it overseas. But that's not what's happened. And I think that disconnect. This is back to what we said before, Kevork. The youth are picking up on that hypocrisy, and it's a fundamental crack in the system. And even if Trump wins and MAGA's flying the victory flag and all this problem ain't going to go away. And look on the left, you're talking about the two-state, one-state solution debate. Some of the leading proponents have been talking about now they've switched to one state. Medea Benjamin, major campaigner, she's talking about a one state. Miko Peled, one state. Ilian Pape, the great Israeli historian from the UK, one state. They're all saying the disintegration of the state of Israel is inevitable. These are mainstream activists that represent that kind of Jewish diaspora in the West, and they're all basically off the two-state thing. But our politicians are stuck on it because it's an easy, out-of-the-box can line that Tony Blinken or any of these. It's a non-controversial position in America, but it's crazy because Israel will say on the same day, go up on the podium, Netanyahu or any of them, and say, we don't support a Palestinian state, period. It's never going to happen. And yet Americans are parroting this fantasy, and the British and the Europeans and Ursula von der Leyen, we support the two-state solution. You know, this is insane.
I think they are also dishonest. The people like von der Leyen, people like the foreign minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, and all these people who continue speaking about the two-state solution and the rights of the Palestinians. While I was speaking with Tarek Chiril Amar. He's the historian from Germany, now lives in Turkey. And he says this is insane. Like, on one hand, they want for the Palestinians to have their rights, and they tell Israel like not to beat up the Palestinians verbally. Basically, it's like he says you go to a room and you see a man beating up his wife, and you say don't hit your wife, and then you give him a baseball cap or the stick, right? It's like always now you see the imminent destruction of the Palestinian homes and territories because of this support, right? By people like Ursula von der Leyen and in Kamala Harris. And then those are the women in the establishment. Now they come and they say during these elections, if you are a woman, you have to vote for Kamala Harris. If you're for reproductive rights, you have to vote for Kamala Harris. So they also play not only identity politics, but this gender politics based on, at one point, they don't know what a woman is. They don't want to define woman, but when election comes, they know what a woman is, because all of a sudden, if you're a woman, you have to vote because of the reproductive rights, although it's not only women who can be pregnant, right? Like they have been brainwashing us for 3.5 years or more about, we don't know what is a woman. and now we know what is a woman, and we have to vote for Kamala Harris. It's a really crazy scenario.
Well, and it's an interesting point you brought up. It's actually one of the sort of major touchstones for U.S. politics, demographics, and the swing vote. And one of the key swing votes in any U.S. election, I'm talking in the modern era, say post 1970, one of the key demographics is the white suburban women,
Mm.
white suburban women. Now, Kamala Harris and the Democrats are hanging everything on the abortion issue. And it's this fear that if Trump becomes president, that he's going to make abortion a federal law to legalize abortion. That's not going to happen. It's not a federal issue. It's the whole Roe versus Wade being overturned simply means the issue is being kicked back to the states. So that's actually more democratic than at a federal level, because it allows local communities to decide their own destiny. Okay, that aside, that's the main issue that Kamala Harris is hanging on, thinking that to capture that all-important white suburban women swing vote, that the abortion issue is going to be the number one issue. Now, it goes, and studies show that when you have a faltering economy, then that becomes, for white suburban women, a very important issue. Is the economy, is inflation, is the cost of living and food and so forth. So the question is, does the abortion issue trump, no pun intended, does it trump the issue of the economy? Okay, now Trump took a hit with white suburban women in 2016 and 2020. In 2016, it was the Access Hollywood tape that came out right before the election about Trump grabbing a handful of pussy and all that with Billy Bush. And it horrified I know a lot personally, a lot of women that changed their vote in October because of the release of that tape. Okay, so he took a hit with that demographic. Then the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit and all of this hurt him in 2020 with that key demographic. And even the Mormon vote, because of his perceived philandering with women, hurt him with the Mormon vote in 2020. That can be consequential, because the Mormon vote is Utah, Arizona, Nevada, Western Washington, Idaho, and part of California. It's not insignificant in terms of the spread on that. So he's probably recovered a lot since then. So then it's kicked right back to the economy. So that's one of those touchstone demographics in polling, that it's a bellwether demographic.
Yes.
Where white suburban women go, so does the election in a close race.
I was trying to see some of the celebrities who endorse Kamala Harris. There are many celebrities in the US endorse Kamala Harris. And it seems that there is a collective hatred against Trump by the celebrities. I'm talking about the people in Hollywood. And it puzzles me a little bit, because in the past elections, probably it was still the case. Now Trump is more of a mainstreamish than he used to be a few years ago. But this anti-Trump campaigns by these celebrities, especially by the people who were on the list of PDD, it doesn't give so much of positive vibes for Kamala Harris as well. And the people who were like don't know who to vote, it seems like they're making an advertisement for Donald Trump by endorsing Kamala Harris, right?
Well, big Democratic backers in Hollywood, traditionally, the studio executives, Harvey Weinstein, good friend of the Clintons, he was caught in this massive scandal, Me Too type scandal. P. Diddy, this has been a huge blow, because especially Obama really kind of cultivated this image of him as a street guy. He changes his accent to sound a bit more ghetto, and he always would have the rappers around. He was really appealing to black men. He's totally lost that. When Donald Trump is photographed in the dock in court, being, with the man and the system against him, and being shot, and getting arrested with the mugshot, immediately he connects with Black America. Yes. And they're saying that he's like us, kind of thing. They look at Kamala Harris and like, who's she? How does she? So, and Biden said in 2020, when he was campaigning, he did an interview with Charlemagne the God, or whatever his name is, and he said, if you don't vote for Biden, you ain't black. And it was really the most condescending, patronizing thing that anybody would have said. It's almost like he could have done that in blackface, and it would have been appropriate. But a lot of people bit their tongue and took orders from DNC head office on that. But they're not going to bite their tongue anymore, because they see because they think if the system can do that to Trump, who used to be president, it can definitely do it to anybody else. That's how the average person the average African American male might be viewing that particular issue. So the Democrats also got pulled down on a number of other similar scandals like this. So this idea that celebrity can buy a victory. Hillary Clinton had every celebrity endorsement known to man. Katy Perry did her, lent her Eye of the Tiger pop hit as her campaign theme. She was getting photographed and everyone was endorsing her, every newspaper, and she still lost. So what did that teach us? That taught us that the influence of Hollywood, of corporate America in that sense, it's in big music and all that is just reduced and reduced. Why? Because one of the big reasons why is because what has displaced mainstream fame? What has displaced mainstream media airtime? It's the internet, social media. Who are the most popular accounts on social media? They're not politicians. They're not Hollywood celebrities. They're politicians. And they're people like Musk, who are political business people and so forth. They're getting all of the eyeballs and attention. So politics is the new Hollywood. Politics became the new Hollywood in 2015 with the campaign of Donald Trump. And this is like Hollywood kicking and screaming for relevance. This is why they do these stunts and make these videos. They really believe they have the power to decide collectively who's going to be running the country. And they were somewhat successful in 2020. Arguably, there's a lot of election rigging and questionable things in terms of censorship, Hunter Biden's laptop, and just outright chicanery going on in swing states on election day and afterwards. So, but put that aside, I think we can all argue now and recognize and agree that the influence of celebrity, it's sinking so fast. And people on YouTube, social media influencers, they got much bigger followings than people in Hollywood.
Yeah, and these podcasters, there has been tens of new podcasters spawning in the US recently with massive platforms pushed by people like Elon Musk promoting their work and these Twitter spaces, this and that. And it's crazy. Like you see the moment Elon Musk pushes someone and this journalist or podcaster gets hundreds of thousands of followers and becomes relevant. Like it doesn't need much to create someone from nothing, right? Like from thin air. Donald Trump has to repost or quote post your tweet and you get hundreds of thousands of followers. And he says, interesting. He says, recommended. You have to read this, voila, read this, what's happening here, or watch this video, bro, you have tens of millions of followers and you can create anyone from nothing, basically. And then these people for the past 4 years, I don't want to name names now, I see a very critical approach for foreign policy, this and that. And then the moment of the election comes, they all shifted toward Trump. It was so quick for them how they became Trumpers and a massive supporter of Trumpers, although they were silent. And many of these people, they have risen into this they became stars during the COVID era because it was critical and people were condemning Biden's, but nobody mentioned that it was Trump who introduced the vaccines, right? At the beginning, he was the one who introduced the vaccines. So it seems to me that they give a pass sometimes to Trump when he does things that they don't like as well. For example, sending funds to Israel. They don't want to send to Ukraine, but Israel is a completely different issue for them, right? Those who say they support the MAGA movement, they flip when it comes to Israel.
Yeah. Well, they don't want to see America go to war with Russia, but they don't mind America carpet bombing Iran. And I think that also has to do with the power calculation. People are sort of hedging and thinking, oh, we could defeat Iran, but we can't defeat Russia. It would cause too much damage in Europe. Very cynical, zero-sum game calculation that some people make. But I think on the influencer issue, what you're talking about, the internet journalist, the ex-Twitter journalist, this phenomenon where you just post JPEGs and breaking, put in a headline, and then all of a sudden you're getting millions of views. Yeah, these are getting boosted. I mean, there's people that were retweeted by Donald Trump in the 2016 election. and they became part of the MAGA movement because just of retweets. Like as soon as that was almost like being made by the mob. You know, I don't want to name any names, but you know, there's people that you wouldn't even know who they are. Some of them have already faded into irrelevance again,
Yes.
but you wouldn't know who they were. And then there's also people who drafted off the back of Bernie Sanders and have now repositioned themselves as MAGA. And so there's that sort of mainstream. I mean, everybody in the what they call the independent media or alternative media, all the leading top ones come from the mainstream.
Yeah.
Russell Brand, Joe Rogan, and the list goes on. Tim Pool, they build up their followings on the back of mainstream institutions, and then left and you know, colonized or cultivated, whichever way you want to look at it, Rumble and these other spaces. So they didn't come up through the organic detritus of the internet like some people did. I think the only sort of authentic, credit where credit's due, the only really authentic creature of the internet, well, is Alex Jones. And actually, he was a creature of terrestrial radio, independent pirate radio first. So, I mean, he's the only one I can think of that didn't surf in from the mainstream to take over the independent media. He built his own little empire through the adversity and grit, and he's a good salesman and he loves controversy. So
he picks like he's like he smells the controversy from far away and he picks on it.
He thrives in controversy. He's amazing. So he's the best salesman in American history. And he's funded his operation by selling product, and he can sell anything. He can take a bar of soap and turn it into $100 million business. I mean, that's how good he is. And but he's the only one I can say that's really authentic, and that he did a lot to help Trump get elected in 2016. Alex Jones brought his whole crew. Michael Savage is another one. I don't know if you follow American conservative radio, but Michael Savage is probably in my mind one of the greatest radio voices ever in the history of radio. And it was his endorsement that really put Trump over the edge with a lot of those Republicans that were undecided in 2016. And so that was somebody on the terrestrial radio as well. But today it's a different game. It's the Rogan podcasts. It's kind of, you go into the camp, preach to the converted. It's become very partisan, I noticed. There's not really a space for real debate anymore, if you notice, Kevork, because two parties will not agree. It'll be difficult to get them to agree to come in for a gladiator match. That's the problem. I think people need to see more of that. I think people want to see more of that, but it's very, very hard to arrange.
Yeah. Since you mentioned Iran, do you see any of the candidates going to liberate the Iranian woman, oppressed Iranian woman who cannot walk in underwears in public squares in Tehran? What's happening there?
It's amazing what will stir the passions of the Western liberal. But the neocons use this issue too. It's so funny. Back to the woke, anti-woke thing, Kevork. Those who call themselves anti-woke or conservatives, who make fun of wokeness and whatnot, and then lambaste the LGBT and the trans and whatnot. When it comes to Iran, they suddenly become LGBT activists.
Yeah,
and they do the same with Syria and the same with Russia. What about the gay rights in Iran? They're throwing people off cranes. You hear the same thing. And then this girl who, by all accounts, looks like she was having a mental episode. I mean, that's what I read from this. She was having a mental episode, but it got remarketed in the West as she was doing an anti-hijab protest, and a gratuitous skin and flesh showing there for the internet. I mean, I really feel bad for this girl because I don't know how it's going to affect her going forward in your life. I mean, it's just the fact that this has been all over the internet is also going to be very traumatic. But it's so funny that that's what it takes to stir the passions of the Western liberal and conservative mind, not an ongoing genocide in Palestine. How many tens of thousands of people do we need to see killed in Lebanon, in Gaza, in the West Bank? But that's going to get the Western media up in arms more than anything Israel's done in 12 months, to me, is kind of just tells you where Western civilization is at right now.
Actually, and this is the truth, Patrick. What you say is very true, and it's really frustrating. I mean, I live in the West. I come from West Asia, so I have combined both of, let's say, values, and I'm very flexible person, and I adopt any value or any way of life that I feel fits me, suits me, and fits my environment. And but I'm a modest person. Like I don't see that. I don't think a woman walking in her underwear is woman empowerment. But they're trying to portray this, and they're very obsessed with Muslim women for some reason. That they want for Muslim women to walk without clothes. What's wrong with them? Really?
This is one. If you listen to Tommy Robinson and the kind of far right in Britain and in the US, and one of the big complaints from the extremists is, look, they don't allow their women to be free. You know, like it's almost like it's like the colonial soldiers saying, you won't let us have access to your women. I mean, this is almost the sort of meta level gripe that Western men have, because they want the women to be completely gratuitous in their liberal expressions. And what makes me even more what makes me laugh more is the hypocrisy of those in the West that call themselves conservative. And conservative, there's a whole set of values. One of those values is you don't want to over sexualize society and your children, and you don't want your wife and so forth. You're conservative. You want to sort of dial it down because that says something about your values, your family values. Yes. But they want to project this wild Western, out of control progressivism on the Middle East and Iran, and they want it to go turbocharging there because they see that as a way to weaken their culture, Islamic culture, Middle Eastern culture, and soften it up to become more Westernized. And yes. Again, this is back to that kind of colonial mentality of I would say not just American exceptionalism. But this was called back in the days of Teddy Roosevelt, vindicationism, which is mean that America has broken free of its colonial chains. It's now a world power, and now it's been vindicated that the American system is so good and so successful that we need to export that to the world and evangelize the American Western system to the world. And I think this is like just the latest iteration of that thing that's been going on for like 120 years in America. The neocons had their version of it. Obama, Samantha Power have their version of it, which is democracy and freedom and that. And then now they're doing it with NGOs and Soros and weaponizing identity politics, gender, sex, and things like that. So it's just to me the latest episode in this long-running imperial saga.
Yeah, you know what I realize about this identity thing? Their obsession also with women comes from, I don't know if they are aware of it or not, but you mentioned imperialism, and this is something that I realized and noticed recently. They want for the people in our region, let's say in West Asia, to decouple from their identities. And our identities in the region, it's detached to our civilization, our history, our religion, and our culture, and all the civilizations that pass through the region. So we are deep rooted into this. Like I probably have roots in the Greek Empire or the Roman or the Ottoman, and before that, the Arabs and everyone that passed through. So we have this identity, which gives us this strength, the resilience to resist against foreign occupation, right? The invaders who coming to our countries with their, whether corporations or let's say through direct forces. So if they destroy this identity and decouple us from our these deep-rooted identities, then we no longer have belonging to our land and our homeland. And if you don't have a belonging, you don't fight. For what's the worth? Why would you fight if you don't belong to some place? If your home is not yours, why would you fight and give your life for your home? If it's not your wife, if it's not your kid, there are different things that they're really trying spiritually and psychologically to really destroy the people's minds in the region. And this is something that also what makes things easier, the naivety of many people in our region accepting for these NGOs to come and work in their countries and indoctrinating the youth, the women, and thinking that what exists in the West in these terms are the correct ones. This is women empowerment. This is women rights. Women can generate nowadays millions of dollars per year on making porn content. Sorry for it, but so many women. I'm so shocked in the US that I watch sometimes this podcast. They all have these OnlyFans accounts. So there is like an encouragement for them to generate money through this, and there other people being persuaded of it. But on the other hand, we have another, let's say, the other side of this story. I want to show you this comment. And one of our viewers says, women do not have to serve in the military, so why they get to choose to vote to send the men to war?
That's a legit question. That's a legit question. I mean, you know,
look, if they have, I think this is important question. I never thought about it, to be honest with you. I never thought about this from this angle, but it's true. If you want to vote for Kamala Harris as a woman, let's say, to continue the war in Ukraine against Russia, and if you want to vote as a woman for Trump to kick out the regime in Iran, they call it a regime, then I think you should also go to war. Like, if you voted, if you participated in the voting, I think women also should go to war. What do you think about that?
Well, that would create a little bit of an interesting problem, because on the partisan side, Democrats are more hawkish against Russia. It's clear.
Yeah.
They're more pro-Ukraine war and so forth. Republicans, less hawkish against Russia, more hawkish against Iran, more pro-Israel. It seems like that's the case anyway on the surface. So, but there's been a lot of talk about national conscription in the last 2 years in Germany, in Europe. We hear ministers talking about it. Even in America, people are making noises about it because they realize that the ranks of NATO are not sufficient to overcome Russia in any sort of real conventional war. So, and forget about China. That's just another story. So you're getting into this Starship Troopers sort of scenario whereby there's this delusion by politicians that they can, women in pantsuits and men in bad suits, that they can somehow win a war if they spend enough money. And isn't that the lesson from the whole Ukrainian proxy war? We just give them enough weapons and give them, they're brave Ukrainians. They want to fight. We got to give them what they want. As long as we keep that money flowing in the weapons, we're going to defeat the Russians. Russians got shovels. Ukrainians have got Storm Shadow missiles. And the same thing with Israel. They think as long as we plow enough money, bombs, and weapons in there, they're going to eventually snuff out all these terrorists. So this is that sort of delusional mind. And unfortunately, America is driving a lot of this thinking globally through NATO or into the Middle East. But back to the issue you said before, the thing that threatens, and it's so funny how Israel and Israeli interests coincide with American colonial interests so well. And during the Cold War, it was Arab nationalism that was seen as the big threat. And it comes down to a very simple principle. People are willing to fight. If people are willing to fight, you can mobilize your population under a federal flag. Syria is a good example. Syria, if people who haven't been to Syria don't realize what a multi-ethnic and multi-tribal country this is, there are more different groups in one area in Syria as much as any other place on the planet, okay? So to bring all those people together who are willing to serve and defend the values under one flag, that's a threat to Israel. That's a threat to the United States. That's a threat to all the colonial powers. That to have an Arab nationalist state like that, that's not a NATO member, that's not in the Western fold, and the same with every other Arab nationalist or former Arab nationalist state, and they all have the same flags from Egypt, Yemen, Iraq, and also in Syria as well. Lebanon I'll throw in there too, although they're slightly different, but pretty much come from the same post-World War I map-making exercise. But that's the big threat. So if you look at it, the Middle East has had to undergo crusade after crusade after crusade for the last 1,000 and 500 odd years. There's been all of these attempts to subdue and conquer, even before that, the Middle East. And you have to look at the back to Israel. Israel really is the most recent crusade. It's just,
Yes.
instead of Christian chainmail and the cross of St. George, they're using Zionism as the thing to beat down the door in the region. And they have a beachhead. They maintain it for almost 80 years now. But like every other crusade, those castles eventually fall and they change hands. And I think that's probably going to happen in the region as well. But identity politics is one of those things you can break down society with. So they want to use identity politics to subdivide, to kind of create fractures and fissures in places in the Middle East by promoting all the things that Soros and all these NGOs do in places like Syria, even in Saudi Arabia. You look at these editorials in The Guardian about, promoting the LGBT freedom lifestyle in the Middle East. They've been doing that for like 20 years, pumping these ideas out because they want to undermine that conservative base that forms traditional Middle Eastern countries, communities, and so forth. But one country is allowed to have the ultimate identity politics, which is Israel. Israel is the granddaddy of identity politics. Zionism is the most pure expression of radical weaponized identity politics. So ironic that the right in the West, who all rail against identity politics, and Ben Shapiro, that made his whole career decrying identity politics, are the biggest proponents and acolytes for the ultimate identity politics, which even has religious, evangelical, eschatological belief sets stapled to it, that God promised this land. It's in the Bible according to how we interpret it. Therefore, it's our land. So, I mean, imagine if that was allowed all over the world. What kind of planet would we live on? I mean, the whole place would probably be up in smoke by now. But it's allowed to happen in the Middle East because the West believe they can control that pile of burning embers, that they can somehow, manage that fire to their advantage. But now they're learning that that fire has caught all over the region, and it's only a question of time before I think America's imperial days are numbered in the region. I think people are coming to the realization that this is not Condoleezza Rice's New Middle East, something totally different.
Yeah. Patrick, I'm going to ask you the last question, but before that, because you mentioned, what was his name? The Daily Wire's, the American Jewish who met with Benjamin Netanyahu and Jordan Peterson together. What was the name of the podcaster on the Daily Wire?
Was it Shapiro?
Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, he did a podcast with two other, let's say, American Jewish podcasters, and they were discussing which candidate is better for the American Jews or the Jewish people in general. And but just if you flip this and you put three African men sitting and discussing which one is better for them, or three white men talking which one is better for the white people, it would sound so cringe, and people would be offended by it. But they do the identity politics the way they like, and they get the pass. Last question, Patrick. This is on a foreign policy level. We spoke about the empire and the decline of the empire. It seems that there is an attempt in the deep state in the US to freeze the Ukraine war and focus on the Middle East, thinking that this is the place they can score victory against an adversary, which is one of the pillars of Eurasia, namely Iran. Do you think that this is possible, or as we say in Arabic, the bus has passed, or the train has passed for the U.S. empire for such wars?
I think the bus has passed. The train has left the station. It's if you look at there's an old saying: if you read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, know thy enemy. Study, you need to study everything about your enemy. To do that, you can't censor your enemy's media. That's the biggest mistake you'll make, because you can't listen to what their foreign minister is saying in Iran or Russia. And this is what's happened in the West, is you have a whole political class, a whole generation now of people in politics and media that don't understand or know anything about their perceived enemy. In China, it's even worse. The generalizations and beliefs about China that are circulating in US political conversations is so shocking, and so divorced from the actual reality on the ground in a country like China, which is, China's a great civilizational state.
Yeah.
It's been there 5,000 years, and they plan to be there for another 5,000. The United States is a blip on the radar screen in comparison, but yet they claim to all be experts on what the Chinese are thinking, and Xi micromanaging China, just like they think Putin micromanages every aspect of Russia, just like they think Bashar al-Assad micromanages the whole of Syria, and so on and so forth. And then when it comes to Iran, it's even, I think, more insane. I've not heard an intelligent commentary from any US commentator, even on our side, that really delves into the sophistication, the multi-layers of sophistication in Iranian politics and society. If you've ever been to Iran, the thing that strikes you most when you first arrive is how politically active and how politically aware people in Iran have a voracious appetite for politics, debate, and dialogue. It's almost exhausting. You'll find yourself, when you're there, up till 3 a.m. in cafes, having political conversations that you could easily go on till the sun comes up, and they'll do that every night, because this is the way the Iranian mind is. Very, very political. They're very strategic. They're very historically oriented in terms of historical context. They're also very progressive in the technological sense, in a lot of different ways, in business as well. But the West have underwritten them, and I think stereotyped them to a point of absurdity. And I think that they do not realize that not only is the train left the station on this, but what's going to happen is America's going to get so invested in Israel, the dying throes of the Zionist project, and they're going to end up losing a whole bomb in terms of money and resources, maybe blood and treasure, like they have in Ukraine. They're going to make the same mistake with Iran, because all it would take is one diplomat, one smart person in the State Department who's actually been to Iran and been to the Middle East and understands the mood and also the nature of the people there, and realize that, and to come and be vocal about that in Washington to the president and to the press, that saying that no, and also building bridges like our previous diplomats did in America to avert World War III, building bridges with person-to-person diplomacy, by sanctioning everybody, by going on the attack, by banning this and banning that and banning speech in the West. Criticism of Israel is banned on some social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook, and criticism of or anything that agrees with Russia is also censored, and YouTube and other platforms and stuff like that. This is not the way to understand the other powers in the world. And I think to the detriment of the West, this is one of their biggest fatal mistakes. Yeah. And they're doubling down on it, because the more the mainstream and the establishment lose control, the more embarrassed they become that they got the country and the populations into this mess in the first place by making bad judgment calls. Their bottom line is, these are potentially great trading partners in Asia. So it's really a question of, do you want World War III, or do you want world peace? And a lot of people in the West are choosing towards rolling the dice, flirting with World War III, rather than repairing some of these cracks and building bridges with the other side. And so I don't know if that's going to get solved in this generation. I think this generation wants to see the world, half of them want to see the world go up in smoke, in a vanity project, really, for Western civilization, rather than take the world to the next stage, which is peace, understanding, harmony, and prosperity for everybody. And that sounds utopian, like a utopian thing, but it's very possible in today's world. It is. So anyway, that's my rant.
That's a beautiful way to finish this conversation with you, Patrick. Really, I'm very grateful for you coming and sharing your wisdom. I wanted this to be like this, and you never disappoint me with your critical mind and critical points that you made in about these elections. Guys, the X account of Patrick is in the description below. Patrick, do you want for the followers and those who are watching this podcast to follow you in any other platform?
You can find me on X, follow me on X, and if you feel so inclined, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're heavily shadow banned on that
Yeah.
platform, so we can use any of the help to defeat the algorithm there. But 21stcenturywire.com is the home base for our independent platform. So check out our work, support us if you can. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Guys, I will also put the link of the 21st Century Wire in the description below once this stream is over, but his personal X account is already in the description below. Patrick, thank you so much for coming to the show. I will continue this live streaming now. You can go to your duties. Thank you so much for dedicating this time.
Cheers, Kevork. Thank you.
Cheers. Hello, Captain Matthew.
Hey, Kevork, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming to this show. I really appreciate it. I was having now a conversation with Patrick Henningsen, and we spoke about this big day today in the United States. And especially we focused on the domestic issues concerning the Americans, from cultural issues, from wokeism, from gender issues, for example. What motivates the people to vote for Kamala? What motivates the people to vote for Trump? And some people are voting for Jill Stein. And some people are mocking me actually in the chat for saying that if I was born in the US, I would have probably voted for Jill Stein as well. And I say Stein because my German accent is Stein. Right? It's like the Stein. It's difficult for me now. I don't know what's happening. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you said on your profile that you would prefer Jill over Trump and Kamala. Am I correct about that?
That's correct. And thanks for having me back on. And
Pleasure.
It's tough following up Patrick. He's terrific. Right. I'm not setting myself up for success by following someone like him. But anyway, I voted for Jill Stein. I voted for Jill Stein and Butch Ware. I even if there were not this horrific genocide occurring, this American-Israeli genocide of the Palestinian people, I would have voted Green. I believe in multi-party democracy. I believe that we need to substantially rebuild the American electoral and political system. I believe in supporting policies that are beneficial for working class and middle class families. Even without the issues of Palestine, Israel, the Middle East, excuse me, I would be voting Green anyhow. I appreciate you asking me.
I think many people also do not differentiate between the Greens in the US and the Greens in Europe, because the Greens in Europe, they are very hawkish and militaristic, especially in Germany. And I think the Greens of Europe, they asked for Jill to withdraw from the elections, right?
They did, and they did it just this past weekend, Friday or Saturday. Now, I'll cut them some slack because it was a coalition letter, and anyone who's done anything with coalitions knows to get 15 or 20 signatures, it's going to take forever. So they're probably just happy they got it out before the election. But the reality, I'll give them that. But that said, I will also say that, to me, their request for Jill to drop out at that late of date when her name's already on the ballot, and also they fully understand how American Greens work, that American Greens are not going to not vote for, they're not going to, if Jill drops, they're not going to then turn around and vote for Harris. If Jill was not on my ballot, I would have voted for Cornel West. I would have voted for Chase Oliver, the Libertarian, or I would have written in Claudia de la Cruz, the candidate for the Party of Socialism and Liberation, before I ever voted for Harris or ever voted for Trump. So I think that what struck me as that letter from the European Greens, and from what I understand from some folks in European Green parties, is that this letter is causing a lot of friction and a lot of anger within those parties because it was not done in a true representative form of the constituencies of those parties. And that, to me, that gives more strength to my belief that this letter from those Green parties was really done to curry favor with an incoming Harris administration, right?
Yes.
Right. I mean, so it was just a pure political act by these parties to demonstrate to the American Democratic Party that we're on your side, because the Greens, at least as far as I know, with regards to, say, the German Greens, the British Greens, have not been performing well at all. And a
Yes.
lot of that's got to do with that hawkish stance they took, that they've morphed into over this last, I would say, decade or so.
Yeah. I was reading today an article, and the article in Plus 972 magazine, and they say why Democrats were Israel's perfect partners in genocide. They say by masking support for Israel with hollow humanitarian gestures and empathy for Palestinians, Biden and Harris have diluted pressure to end the war. And I truly agree with this. I think that the dishonesty surrounding the Democrats selling their policies under the empathy and colorful slogans, trying to pretend that they care about the Palestinians or anyone else, especially now that women in Iran, they have to be liberated so that they have to have the right to walk naked in the streets, right? It's crazy the way they try to portray these policies, interventionist policies in the region, and package it in this beautiful manner. And that's why I personally find the Democrats are more hypocritical than the MAGA movement, which they clearly say why they're going to Iran, not for democracy, for Israel.
Right. That's exactly correct. The hypocrisy is just it's strategic, it's purposeful, it's not even done, it's by no means accidental or in good nature. This is a platform they push forward. It's their programming in terms of how they campaign, how they speak to the media, how they speak to their constituency in terms of this double speak. There was just a report from, I can't remember if it was Zateo or Drop Site News over the weekend that showed how the different examples of how Harris spoke to voters in Michigan compared to how she spoke to voters, I think it was in Arizona, with regards to Palestine and Israel. So easily speaking out both sides of their mouths. This is what the Democratic Party does. Certainly recall the Afghan war, Barack Obama's escalation, needless and unwinnable and futile escalation of that war in 2009. A lot of that was built around the two pillars of propaganda for war, right? Moralizing and scaremongering. So we have to escalate this war in Afghanistan. We've got to put 250,000 man U.S. and NATO and contractor army in Afghanistan because of democracy, because we have to protect the women. And if we don't, 9/11 is going to happen again. I mean, so that is a fundamental propaganda utilization, fundamental propaganda employees that they use. But then with regards to Palestine, of course, as you were saying, the hypocrisy is clear. Although I think for most of us observing this, seeing how the Democratic Party has treated the Palestinians for decades, understanding the relationship, the very heavy and deep relationship between the Democratic Party and the Israeli lobby, Democratic leadership in Israel itself. I mean, many American members of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats. I mean, you're talking about dozens of American members of Congress have dual citizenship, that they have citizenship with the United States and Israel. And I think that is shocking for a lot of people. And regardless if it's Israel or if it's Paraguay or if it's, wherever, the idea of your elected officials holding on to a dual citizenship be one thing if they were born there, right? And then they, right? I mean, but this is not the case, right? I mean, this is, so you see it's clear. And so I think for most of us this past year who are outside of the Democratic Party, we knew this is where it was always going to go. And we can talk a bit about the pressures that were put on the Democratic Party, but ultimately those were worthless. Those were futile, and that was never gonna matter. And that's a good explanation for why there are those of us who want to build multi-party democracy in the United States, because otherwise, as voters, as an electorate, as a public, we have no leverage on a two-party system.
Exactly. And since we're speaking about hypocrisy, I heard Donald Trump supporters say that in the previous administration of Trump, he couldn't have the chance to drain the swamp and he was manipulated, he was lied to, and the people who were around him, they lied to him, and he was fooled, right?
Right.
And now we have the name of Mike Pompeo is popping up again in the conversation, and this is from yesterday's campaign when he's supporting Trump and Vance, and this is what he said in this case. Let's take a look first.
And I often get asked, Mike, what was it like? Right, the Washington Post described me as the most loyal cabinet member to Donald J. Trump. I had to remind the president that they did not mean that as a compliment. They asked me, what was it like to serve for President Trump? And I told them, and I've told everyone hundreds of times in these 3.5 years, it was the greatest privilege that Mike Pompeo could ever have. I was proud to be a part of President Trump's team. I talked to him every day for 4 years, first as CIA director and then as Secretary of State. And what I was so proud of is that we understood the greatness of this nation, and we never once apologized for the United States of America, not once. Now, President Trump's going to secure our southern border. We will bring peace back to the world. We will take down the ring of fire. We will support our friends in Israel, but he's going to need help to do that.
So the ring of fire is Iran, basically, and they're going to support Israel in the region. How can we speak about peace when they will take down the ring of fire? How are they going to bring down the ring of fire except for military means?
Yeah, and it's very possible too, Kevork, when he says ring of fire, he's referring to China as well too, because the American policy of encircling China, of creating essentially a ring of fire around China with our bases and our warships and our missile fleets, so it's very possible that he was referring China in that moment as well. But with the Middle East, certainly, I think the difference is what you have here between a Harris and a Trump administration with regards to Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East. Its focus is on Palestine. I think it's mirrored of what we see with Israeli politics, where the two poles in Israeli politics, as far as I can tell right now, for say Gaza, are one pole is military occupation, and the other pole is like complete resettlement, complete ethnic cleansing, complete settlement. And that's where somewhere in between is what the Israelis and the Americans are going to do. And I think that's essentially what you see with the Harris and Trump administrations. So best case for the Palestinians, if Harris comes into office, is you have a full military occupation of Gaza, just complete subjugation, living essentially in concentration camps, right? I mean, that's I think the route the Harris administration will go in terms of Israel and Palestine. Trump administration, very, not to be glib, but you can imagine him putting Jared Kushner on a plane to Israel, right, to start selling the beachfront property in Gaza that they speak about. So, I mean, that's what we're looking at here. And with regards to Iran, it's the same thing too. You're going to have the continued posture of the Democratic Party towards Iran, the hawkishness. Let's remember that back in August when the Democratic Party published its platform for this election. In its platform, it criticized Donald Trump for not being strong enough against Iran, for not having attacked Iran, even though Donald Trump, launched all kinds of unreal sanctions on Iran, pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA, the arms control agreement, and assassinated Qasem Soleimani, right? Illegally and criminally murdered him. So, I mean, and the Democrats said he wasn't tough enough on Iran. So you'll have that continuation with regards to American policy under a Harris administration. And with a Trump administration, it will be like a degree further, where, I believe the reports that Miriam Adelson has donated $100 million to the Trump campaign, with the quid pro quo being the annexation of the West Bank. And so where you may not have, say, with the Harris administration, full Israeli annexation of the West Bank, like you might get in a Trump administration, but you're still going to have the reality of the occupied territories taken to levels beyond what we've seen before. I'd say the same thing for Lebanon. You may not, under a Trump administration, the worst of the Israeli ideas about Lebanon may be realized, but even those Israeli ideas that are not the worst about Lebanon are still really awful, right? They're still criminal. They're still brutal. They're still essentially making southern Lebanon uninhabitable, and the Harris administration will go along with that. So it really is, a question of degrees of criminality, a degrees of brutality, and a degree of just how much of the Israeli plans will we fully go along with. That all said, if the Israelis, say you get a Harris administration, if the Israelis go ahead and annex the West Bank, you're not going to see any American response to that. The Americans, a Harris administration will do similar to like the Biden administration did when it came into office. It will just say, okay, and they're not going to cut back weapons in support. They're not going to cut back protection at the UN. They're not going to cut back all the other political support. Right? It will be, just there won't be their erstwhile round of applause coming from DC with the Harris administration. It'll just be a quieter degree of support. So it really doesn't matter, I think, to the Palestinian people. I'm going out, forgive me for speaking on their behalf, but in my perception, my view here as an American, for the Palestinians, there really is not much of a difference between the Harris and the Trump administration.
And do you see any personalities like RFK, Elon, and Tulsi may do in the Trump administration to hold him back in a possible Trump administration from these endless wars? Because one of the platforms that they are running on is we no longer want to wage wars around the world. We want to keep the money here at home. We want to invest in our infrastructure, school, healthcare system, securing the borders in the south, etc. Right? I mean, this is also legit talking point, let's say, which we don't hear much from the Democrat side. But are they really genuine about it? This is the real issue.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, is how sincere are they? And it's a nice thought. It's a nice thought to think, okay, you're going to bring in these technocrats, you want to call Musk technocrat, but like, I think people understand what I'm saying. This idea of people who are focused on business, focused on managerial aspects of government, focused on making government more efficient, however they're talking about it, and that they won't go along with the neoconservative fantasies of Mike Pompeo, that they'll say, Mike, shut up, this makes no sense. History tells us otherwise, and you can't show to me how this is going to work, so we're not going along with it, right? That's a nice thought, but we see always in matters of war and peace that romanticism, right? The propaganda, the idea that it's better to go along and get along than go against the war, the cries for war, the howls for war. So, I mean, why I like to think that you can imagine a Musk, an RFK, and others like that in a Trump cabinet who would say, you know what, this makes no sense to me whatsoever. I think in practice that doesn't actually happen. The other thing, too, is that the government is siloed. And so you're going to have, these type of national security questions, Pompeo and Tom Cotton and Nikki Haley and whoever else might be involved in all this, right? They may just say Elon, respectfully, this is not your business. RFK, respectfully, go back to the EPA, go back to HHS, whatever they're going to put them at. Tulsi Gabbard may be involved in this. I actually saw something yesterday that makes me think she will be involved in it. But Tulsi has been so fickle and so malleable, and she's changed her positions on so many things over the years that I'm not entirely confident in her representing an American first wing of the Republican Party in the way that people hope she will. And certainly, I think with regards to the Middle East, she will be happy to jump on board the talking points of Iran is the largest state-supported sponsor of terrorism in the world, and we have to do something about it. And we have to support our ally, our best friend, the only democracy in Israel. I can see very much Tulsi saying those things in a position at state or DOD or CIA or wherever she'll be. All that said, the people that the White House would be full with under a Harris administration are no better than what a Trump administration is going to bring in. So we're looking at Michelle Flournoy at the Department of Defense, who people, if you remember her, she was Obama's policy director at the Pentagon for the Afghan escalation, the Libyan war, the Syrian war, the coup in Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. She was all there for that. You're looking at Bill Burns, the current CDI director, at State Department, and Phil Gordon, who is Kamala Harris's current national security advisor, is believed to be her will be her national security advisor. And he wrote a book a few years ago where people think, oh, this guy's going to be more realistic, and he's going to not want to overextend the United States. He's going to realize the limitations of power, if you will. And, I've heard that over and over again, and I don't believe it to be the case at all with Gordon, just like I didn't believe it would be the case with, you can run off a whole host of others that they said this about. So I think, again, damned if we're damned either way. The militarized foreign policy of the American empire will continue. It's just going to be shades of how it's presented, with emphasis in some places more than the other.
Indeed. I was today reading for WikiLeaks, and they had posed some serious questions for potential Donald Trump administration. They say some questions for Donald Trump. How will you handle the so-called deep state wolves in MAGA hats circling your transition team, posing as MAGA to obtain powerful positions in a prospective Trump administration? After all, personnel is policy. In your previous administration, you appointed figures like Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, William Barr, former CIA, Robert O'Brien, Nikki Haley, and Elliot Abrams, who often oppose your America First rhetoric, especially on foreign policy and freedom of speech. If elected again, can you assure that these individuals or others like Tom Cotton and Marco Rubio, both funded by arms companies, will not hold positions in your administration? Many of these individuals have not only opposed your policies, but have actively worked against you, even putting their way behind your prosecution. For instance, Mike Pompeo accused you of keeping classified documents, suggesting that doing so endangered U.S. soldiers. He also directed the CIA to draw up plans to assassinate Julian Assange, suppressed the release of JFK files at the CIA's request, and claimed there is no deep state at the CIA. What is your stance towards those who merely feign support for MAGA? Many of these former officials have now cashed in and make substantial profits from lobbying for arms companies, banks, and foreign corporations. For example, Pompeo founded American Global Strategies, which advises arms companies, joined the Israeli disinformation and censorship company Syabra, and took positions with Japanese steel firm Nippon Steel, lobbying to increase foreign steel imports to the US, and arms company Dine Maritime, seeking AUKUS-related contracts. He even launched his own military-industrial investment bank, Impact Investments, and like Hunter Biden, joined the board of a Ukrainian company, Kyivstar, despite lacking relevant experience. While Pompeo's case may be extreme, others have similarly lucrative roles. Will you ban appointments for those who have financial incentives to start wars or increase mass surveillance and censorship? And finally, a growing faction within the Republican Party and among independents advocate for a foreign policy less driven by CIA influence and arms industry profits. Figures like Robert F. Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard have called for increased oversight of the CIA and reduced foreign interventions. However, personnel is policy. Will swamp insiders flatter their way into influential roles and take control of your administration, reducing MAGA to mere rhetoric?
Yeah, I mean, Kevork, I was thinking, that particularly the part where you read about what Mike Pompeo has been up to these last 4 years, which I was actually aware about 2/3 of that probably. So very grateful for you reading it out. I mean, I knew he was up to no good, but I didn't realize
how corrupted he is.
He's been at it, right? The point being is that, like, if you wrote a script about all this and you went to Netflix or somebody and pitched it as a story about DC and empire and corruption and everything else, they'd be like, get out of here, man. This is too unbelievable. Nobody's going to believe this, right? It's too far-fetched. This is the reality of it. I think with regards to Trump and his MAGA supporters, he couldn't care less about them. He uses them as the means to getting into office. He really has no interest in improving their lives, really has no interest in the things he cares about, the things that form the identity of the MAGA supporter. He doesn't care. So whether it's their religious aspects, societal, cultural, etc., he is not interested at all. He just sees them as the means to the ends of getting into office. These other figures, though, whether it's Musk, RFK Jr., and then the national security types we're talking about, Trump sees them as useful. and Trump sees them as being his peers and being as part of the same class, and they are in the elites with him. And so he has a degree of respect for them because, first of all, it's transactional. For everything for Trump is transactional. So Pompeo can still continue to deliver for Trump when he's in office. So if Pompeo is, I'm not sure what he'll be, go back to state, be it head of DOD, whatever, Pompeo will still be able to deliver for Trump in a way that Trump finds helpful to himself. So I think, the list of names that were listed up there before, Haley was one, Robert O'Brien, who was Trump's now security advisor, seems likely he will come back. Well, no, I shouldn't say likely. I'd be shocked if he's not back. He actually wrote a very important essay back in May or June in Foreign Affairs detailing what a Trump foreign policy would look like. And I think that's instructive. It's going to look like the foreign policy before. There'll be a lot of, it will still be an imperial foreign policy. Donald Trump will try and put his brand onto the American empire. And certainly if there are things that will make him look better or he sees something of value to him personally, he will try and pursue that. But for the most part, the American empire will proceed, and again, you just get down to this aspect of the difference between the Democrats and Republicans being that the Democrats are more polished than the Republicans. The Republicans are more uncouth. The Democrats are more subtle, and they're happy to be hypocritical, where the Republicans tell you flat out how they feel. And the reality is that people around the world are going to suffer, whether it's a Harris or a Trump White House.
This is something that I wanted to reply to a friend. He says we can literally compare 4 years of Trump to 4 years of Biden. Are you aware of that? And I could make some comparisons for you, my friend, and one of which is Trump continued the wars that the previous administration has been engaged in. And also he weaponized the sanction regime. And this is something that many people in the US do not understand because they don't know the gravity of the issue when their country imposes draconian sanctions and other countries' economies and suffocate their national currency and their central bank, and they ban them from participating in the SWIFT and making transactions. And even though they say these sanctions, they do not include, for example, medication and food, but once you cannot pay the money, you cannot purchase the equipment, including the medical equipment, which I know very well from Syria, that Syria cannot buy medical equipment from the neighboring countries. They smuggle them basically in the bags of people coming to the country because of the US sanctions. Syria cannot buy, for example, construction materials in third country companies from third country companies because of the sanctions. So this type of sanctions, guys, is also economic warfare. It's not visible to you. It doesn't drop a bomb, but it kills a person, and it kills people's hopes and dreams and their ability to buy bread for the child that they have or send them to schools. So no, Trump also sent 15 million Syrians to below the poverty line through this. And he assassinated, for example, Qasem Soleimani, who was majorly responsible for defeating ISIS in the region. He threatened to assassinate Bashar al-Assad, and this is all documented. He gave the Golan Heights, which is Syrian, to Israel, and he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So no, he also didn't pursue policies that are America first, and in many cases it was again for the sake of Israel.
One thing I want to add to that, Kevork, so people understand Donald Trump's wars, his militarized foreign policy, whatever you want to call this, we're picking up where Barack Obama had shifted them. So what happens in the second half of the Obama administration is that the United States shifts to proxy warfare. You have the disaster of the Iraq War, the political consequences for the Republican Party because of that. The Obama administration and the Democrats suffer tremendous consequences, primarily due to the Great Recession in the U.S. is occurring in 2010. The Democrats lose 1,000 seats nationwide, and they never recover from that. Right, and that dominates. That really has a huge impact on the Obama administration for the next 6 years. And somehow the Afghan war isn't a huge factor, but it's just only because Obama started pulling troops out in 2011, they're able to avoid the narrative of the war. But it's clear the Americans cannot put large amounts of ground troops someplace, take casualties, and not suffer political consequences back at home.
Mm.
And so, Donald Trump is just at this point, and from 17 to 21, is essentially just following the war plans that have been put in place by the Obama administration. So all the things you rattled off, you can add more. Certainly what Trump was attempting to do with the coup in Venezuela. We can talk about what the Saudis were doing in Yemen, killing Saudis, and the Emiratis were doing in Yemen, killing 400,000 Yemenis. Could not have done that without the support of the Trump administration, on and on. The weaponization, not weaponization, but sending weapons into Ukraine, escalating the Ukraine crisis. I mean, this is all, and then certainly everything we want to talk about China, the bellicosity there, and the disastrous trade war that Trump launches with China as well. I mean, yes, this idea that somehow comparing Biden, Harris, Trump, Pence, and saying that Trump was better on foreign policy because he didn't start any new wars. I mean, that is just, at that point, you're just really in semantics, right? I mean, he didn't end any. He let the U.S. military roll over him in Syria. He let the U.S. military roll over him in Afghanistan, those types of things. But go ahead, please. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No worries. This is the point that Oli says that Trump ordered troops out of Syria. His generals lied to him. Is he perfect? No. Did the genocide happen under him? No. Did Ukraine happen under Trump? So I just want to tell him that even if his generals lied to him, he kept the forces in Syria. And then he said, I kept the forces in Syria for the oil. Right. We are there to keep the oil. He said that literally, I'm quoting him, when he met with the president of Turkey, Erdogan. And he sent also offensive weapons to Ukraine under his watch. I mean, he also, I think, withdrew from the nuclear deal. He withdrew from the with another ballistic missile deal with Russia, I believe. So there were multiple.
He withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces deal with, as well as the Open Skies Treaty, which was incredibly consequential and made things very unstable. Open Skies Treaty was the treaty between Eisenhower and Khrushchev that allows each nation to overfly each other to verify what's going on. Because then what you don't want to have happen is you don't want nuclear powers to just be guessing about what the other side is doing. It's a real easy pathway to mistakes and, all kinds of things, and, misinterpretations and just going with your worst beliefs, so Open Skies was canceled.
Human mistake.
And to be clear, the Biden administration didn't recover from any of that. The Biden administration didn't fix any of that. Biden administration has not done anything to get back into those treaties, to bring about new ones, to move the embassy in from Jerusalem back to Tel Aviv. Yeah, so I mean, a pox on both houses.
Yeah. Last point, Matthew, your prediction. Who do you think will... Do you want me to begin, or you want to say your guess first?
I don't know. I mean, if you corner me on this, Kevork, I got to say that I would go with the idea that, look, the polls in 16 and the polls in 20 were off, that they favored the Democrats. People counter that and say, well, hey, the polls in 22 were off, they favored the Republicans. I think that because the polls being off, because of a number of things, including Harris's lackluster abilities as a politician, the fact that the incumbent is being held responsible for a number of things, including the inflation that we've endured here in the United States, which is a huge issue, the tone deafness of Democrats who say, well, inflation's back down to 3%, but you're still paying way more than you were paying 4 years ago. I mean, it's even if it only went up 3% annually at this point, I'm still paying a lot. It doesn't wipe out, doesn't reset the baseline, and that type of tone deafness, that type of smugness and condensation, I think is turning a lot of people off on the Democrats. So I would say, and I'll change my mind about this after tonight, maybe. But I would say that if I had to say it, I think Trump will win, mainly because the polls were wrong. But that's all I'm going off of, right? So it is very close. We are looking at a very difficult period coming up. The Republicans for 4 years have planned to not just discredit the elections, but to contest them and to steal them essentially as they can, and the ability for there to be acts of violence. But I don't think we've seen anything like this, at least in my lifetime, with the way that things have been primed for maybe organized violence, but most especially individual violence. People who have been, and this goes for the Democrats as well, because we've seen 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump. This idea that someone has to step up and stop the fascist, right? I mean, so the idea that there's violence coming from the Democrats, from individuals or maybe small groups, that's possible too. But primary concern is violence coming from the right wing. Again, individuals, small groups, repeat of kind of what we saw on January 6th, maybe. So this could be a rough few months for the United States of America following tonight.
This is not a wishful thinking, guys. I'm just guessing, and this is just based on my subjective observation of the American platforms. I think that Trump will be the next president. I could be wrong, of course, but this is just a guess. This is just a guess. And also some of the issues happening in the region, in the Middle East, it gives me the impression that they need someone like Trump to come to power for more hawkish policies in the Middle East. Again, this is just my interpretation. You're allowed to disagree with me, guys. It's totally fine. You follow this channel. Sometimes we agree or sometimes we disagree, because I see the fights happening in the live chat about these opinions. Some people love Donald Trump. I'm not against you, but I'm just telling you my subjective opinion about it. So I respect all your opinions. You can say your opinion clearly. Don't delete anything. And this is just my opinion. And this was a brilliant conversation with you, Matthew. Thank you so much, really, for coming to the show and dedicating your time for me and for the audience of Syriana Analysis.
Of course. Thank you for having me on, Kevork, and thanks to everyone for watching and listening.
Exactly, guys. And before we leave, don't forget the X account of Matthew is in the description below. And before that, we had Patrick Henningsen, also his X account in the description. All the guests that we have, I literally include their links so that you can see their work as well. And we will see each other tomorrow. It's going to be another Q&A session on Wednesday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families, and peace be upon you, Matthew.
All right,
Salam.
thank you, Kevork.